Welcome everyone. Good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world. It's afternoon and it's hot in Oxford, Georgia today. Finally, it's been cool this month, actually, compared to most Junes here. I've been the college chaplain at Oxford for 14 years, so I'm starting year 15 now, and I'm a twice-over graduate of Emory in the theology school at Candler. And I'm very happy to be here. And the topic actually grows out of my doctoral work at Candler in the Doctor of Ministry program in their church and community engagement program. And I graduated from that in 2017. And the dissertation or project that I did was to develop a course to teach to students here at Oxford on understanding community. So I hope that you'll get a little snapshot of kind of what we do in the course itself, because it will also help you, I hope, in your networks and in your personal and professional life. That's my goal, at least today. It's hard to cover a semester's worth of material in 20 minutes, so I've tried to pick the important stuff, and I hope I've gotten that right, and we'll have time for some questions at the end as well. So, Alex, if you'll go ahead and do the next slide. This next slide is just intros. So I know we did a little bit of this in the large group, but now we're in a smaller group, and it wouldn't be right on me to build community without doing this first round of introductions. So we already see your name, but in the chat, would you share the following: the city that you're Zooming from for this session? And you could just separate these by commas. It doesn't need to be long and drawn out, but the city, the room, wherever you are. Is it your office? Is it your living room? Is it outside that you're currently inhabiting, doing this Zoom call? And then the material below your feet. So if I were sharing mine right now, I would say Oxford, my work office, and carpet. Actually, I'm standing on a standing mat at my standing desk, but below that is carpet. So would you mind doing that so that we can see all of that in the chat? You might bring up your chat just so you can have a look at where we are and at how we're bringing ourselves into this Zoom space today. This is one of the things that certainly I'm guessing all of us have grown accustomed to now that we've had COVID in our lives, is gathering virtually. Maybe some of us did that before, but I actually used Zoom for the very first time 2 months before COVID hit. I hope that didn't bring COVID on, but it was after those 2 months passed, I used Zoom every single day for a lot of time. So we see all the Detroit, Cat's Tap Room, and a bar stool. Susanna is one of my former students, so I'm glad you're here. Austin, Texas, my bedroom and carpet. Alexandria, Virginia, home office, hardwood. So you can scroll down and see these places. I was in a Zoom meeting not too long ago. Well, actually, it was during the pandemic with a pretty well-known writer, Priya Parker, who wrote a book called The Art of Gathering. It's a great book. And she talks about gathering and how we bring people together as being an art, and how we're often maybe doing some backwards things or wasting our time with some of the things we're doing, but how to do it more efficiently, but also to build that community. And in this Zoom call webinar that she did with us, she used this activity and reminded us that even though we're not in a room physically together, where we see each other, where we can shake hands or maybe give a hug or whatever it is, we still bring our bodies into a Zoom space. We're not that disconnected. We still do that, and that's part of the gathered community. And to do that, she reminded us to share where we're coming from, specifically what room in our building or home, and then the material below our feet. What's grounding us? What are we connected to the earth with in that moment? And so I appreciate you doing that, and for us to see everybody. If we tried to do introductions, that would take up the entire time. So this is our way of doing introductions this morning. And again, welcome to you. I'm going to tell you a few things about what drives me in this work, and this is the first one. Again, I mentioned that my doctoral work was this, so that's clearly a first way of entering this work on understanding community. But this is as recent as a couple of months ago from the Surgeon General. We've known warnings from the Surgeon General before, warnings about smoking, warnings about alcohol, warnings about obesity, And this is the first time a Surgeon General has warned us about loneliness. And it's 100% true. It's 100% true for our college students who are coming to college these days, who are coming out of this pandemic as well, who were removed from their own friends and connections. But the Surgeon General in this article in the New York Times said, we've become a lonely nation and it's time to fix that. And the Surgeon General's got a great report out right now about this and some of the things that we can be doing. In the course I'm going to teach this fall, my students are going to read the Surgeon General's report and do some reflecting on that and hopefully incorporate it and integrate it. I encourage you to take a screenshot of this so that you can basically just Google that title, New York Times, and it'll pop up for you. It's a great article to read. It's not just the realization of COVID that this loneliness comes. In 2016, another New York Times article, not the Surgeon General, but someone who was also studying loneliness at the time. The title of that one, and we read this very first day in my course on understanding community, was how social isolation is killing us, and a study done showing how loneliness was correlated with death. Certainly in older adults, it was showing that, and disconnection for folks post-retirement was a predictor of an earlier death post-retirement. So this is not new, but it has been exacerbated by COVID. We know that suicide rates are up, and this is true certainly too of the student population that we work with today. But this is one thing that drives me into this, and you might guess, as someone, as a clergy person, as a college chaplain trying to facilitate the ways in which we make meaning and build community, this is at the top of my mind, and it's at the top of what I'm doing in my work. And I'm delighted to be able to teach. The course that I teach now is a course with first years only. So we're getting the very fresh students who just come out of high school in our discovery seminar, which I will also be their advisor for their 2 years at Oxford, and teach them in this first course on the topic of understanding community, and really spend a lot of time trying to help them integrate into the community and college life. The method that I use in this work, and this is where I hope you'll get a few things from this today, a few nuggets that you might be able to incorporate into your own work, that you'll also be able to incorporate, I hope, into the work with your alumni networks, wherever you are, and how you're doing that work with the boards that were mentioned, but also with general alumni and other volunteers that you bring together. I'm guessing in your social and or service opportunities that you do in those communities. And that's asset-based community development. Perhaps some of you have heard of this, maybe you've done some work in it, or perhaps it's brand new. It's been around since the early 1990s, and it developed out of Northwestern University. John McKnight, who you'll see as the author of the book posted on this slide, and Jody Kretzmann were really the two people who started asset-based community development, again, out of Northwestern University in Chicago. And I don't know if you can see me if you're looking at a full screen, but this is the book that launched them. It's now referred to as the Green Book, but it's called Building Communities from the Inside Out. And again, it's actually John Kretzmann and John McKnight, Building Communities from the Inside Out. This is early 90s, so there are going to be some dated things in this book, but a lot of the concept is still the same. And it gives you some of the hands-on examples that you might put into play, including doing surveys. And again, today you could create digital surveys, but they were doing door-to-door paper and phone surveys back in the day, as they were doing this work on asset-based community development, or ABCD as it's often referred to. The book that's on the screen here is the most recent book really connected to ABCD work, and that's The Connected Community, Discovering the Health, Wealth, and Power of Neighborhoods. This is the book that my students will read this semester. It was just published in 2023, and one of the things I love about it is that one author is from Europe and one is from the US. So it's showing examples of the work being done in at least both of those settings. They also pull in Australia in that work and in Latin America as well, Latin and South America, Central and South America as well. And the quote here on the screen is from Parker Palmer, who more of you may know than these other guys. Palmer is a great writer on community, on sort of spiritual practices and education. And this is from his foreword: positive and persistent social transformation always involves local residents finding ways to pool and invest their gifts in a common cause. Some really key words here: social transformation, local residents, and gifts. Those are three things that I really want to kind of key in on today, especially gifts. This is one of the main components of the course that I teach. And for me, it's one of the main things about asset-based community development that I think would be helpful to you in your own networks. A little bit of background. This was the theory that I was taught in my program, my doctoral program, by David Jenkins, who taught at Candler at the time. It was how I, in the course that I had with him, was shaped to engage the local community here in Oxford, not the campus community, but beyond campus, to engage local residents and develop a mapping team to map certain things, the assets, for one, in our city. And what this work will say, and this is really the main premise of asset-based community development, is when we go into communities, whatever that community is, so if it's your alumni network, but thinking about, our neighborhoods where we live, or neighborhoods that we're working in, that we're serving in, we have historically, over time, gone into those places and immediately looked at the challenges or sometimes the negatives. And we've started there. These guys aren't saying that those things don't exist, and they're not trying to gloss over those challenges, or the needs, if you will, is one of the words that they use. But they said, what if we went into our communities and instead of looking at the needs first, we searched for the assets. We figured out the gifts. What are the people in our community bringing as their own gifts? And this is the key tenet of asset-based community development. I can't teach you everything I know about it today in this short time, but that's the thing that you should walk away with. How do we walk into our communities, whatever that community is, and tap into those assets? How do we discover the gifts? How you do that will be, I've got one activity today that you could use, and I'm going to get you to think about your gifts. But there may be other things that you can think of, and certainly you could touch base with me and I can help brainstorm other ideas post this webinar today. But you may think of creative ways to do that, right? How do you do that? And then that begins to build that community. Once we know the gifts, once we share the gifts with each other in terms of talking about our gifts, and then as we put those gifts into practice, which I think also retains our engagement, retains our community volunteers, our alumni, once those gifts get utilized. It's just like in volunteer work. If you don't utilize people's gifts, they're not going to keep coming back. They want those gifts to be put into practice. One of the main assignments that I do, I'm keeping an eye on my time, and I think I've got about 9 minutes left, or maybe 8 before we do some Q&A. One of the main assignments that I give in our course on understanding community is the gift presentation. It is the most daunting assignment the students have, and it ends up being the best assignment that they have. They have to get past it before they can see it as the best. You all understand that. You know what that's like. You have to get through something to see it as beneficial, even if you failed during it. So I asked them at the beginning of the semester to start thinking about what is a gift that they bring to this world, to this place, at this moment in time. What is something that they do well enough that they can teach us about? And at the end of the semester, the last 3 classes, each student gets about 15 minutes to present their gift to us. And they, do a creative PowerPoint or Canva or whatever presentation mode they want to use. And just give you an example of one, several gifts. One, a couple of years ago, a student did, they were a drum major in high school. And that was something that they talked about, how it literally saved them through high school years, being in that role, doing that. And they taught us how to conduct. They taught some simple conducting about their drum major role. Another student talked about photography and showed us the evolution of her photography through middle school, high school, and then into college, and shared that gift. One student in a course that I taught at Candler, actually, I adjunct professor there for a semester on a similar course on understanding community. She brought in her cello and she played the cello for us, beautiful playing. And she told us a story about how when she was a child learning the cello, when she first started learning it, about 8 years old, she started having headaches that she had not had until she started playing the cello. And when she started playing the cello, she noticed that these headaches were starting. So she told her teacher about it. And the teacher said, let me watch you play and let me see if I can figure out what might be going on. So she played the cello and the teacher watched her for a little while. She stopped her finally and she said, I know exactly what's happening. You're focusing so hard on getting it right that you're forgetting to breathe. What a lesson when she told us that. This is true about many things, I think, for a lot of us in our lives. When we focus so hard on getting something perfect or right, we often can forget to breathe, which is essential, right? And her lack of breathing was a lack of oxygen and causing her headaches in the middle of these cello. But this is the gift idea. And I'm one of the things I hope that you'll walk away thinking about today is, what is your gift? If we had time, I would ask you to present about your gift to the rest of us and share what it is that you bring to the world that you do well enough that you could teach us about it. Again, I think that's an activity you could incorporate into, you don't have to have people present, but you can have them think about or create creative ways to get them to drill down into what is a gift that I bring and how does it maybe relate to this alumni work, to this engagement work, to this volunteer work. So I would encourage you to think about that. I'm going to move us on to the last slide. I don't know how much time we've got. I'm running.
We've got about 3 more minutes.
Is that total? Do we have time for Q&A?
I don't think we might have, because that's when we're
later.
Scheduled to be back on the other room, I believe.
All right, I'm going to stop. This other activity, the gift sort of piece, is really more of what I want you to think about. This activity is a diversity and sort of identity-based activity that I think also is helpful, but I can always send you that, or I think it might be in your material that you'll receive after this leadership conference today, that you can also do with yourself, but also with your group. And I'm happy to answer questions about that afterwards if you want more about that activity. But I want to give you time for a couple of questions, and I see Carolyn has one. So,
quick question, Reverend Dr. Pace. Thank you for this great info today. Yeah. I'm in the Emory 60 Plus network, and I'm going to be working to pull in potential volunteers for our group. One thing we have to do is identify what those volunteer opportunities are, but I'm really interested in thinking about how we draw people out about their talents and gifts so that we connect them with the right volunteer opportunities. So if you really mean that I can reach out to you and come out and visit you at Oxford and talk this through with you, I would love to do that.
I do really mean that. I believe in this work so much, and that's why I want other people to do it. And so I would be happy to. Do you live in Atlanta?
Yes, I do. Okay.
I'll
call you next week.
We can even meet halfway, but I'd love for you to see the Oxford campus if you're willing to come out. If you haven't.
Oh, I love coming out there. I've seen it many times. I'd be happy to come out. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there other questions? And again, the I Come From activity, I would love for you to reach out. I can give you sort of how I run that with groups. We do this a lot with students. I'm going to do a real quick. Can I share my screen really quickly, Alex?
Yes, you can now.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm going to stop sharing. Yep.
I'm going to show you the activity just so you'll see it. Can you see that? This is a really simple, but a sort of identity based and putting people in pairs after they've answered their fragments. Really neat way to do it. And Diana, I see your hand, so I want to make sure you get your question in. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
It actually has to do with this activity. How would you, it sounds like you would usually facilitate this in person. When you're dealing with a larger group, like an audience or like a distribution, how would you go about facilitating, kind of taking this information for our networks, right? Like we might be able to do like a follow-up like meeting where we ask people to join us virtually, but just thinking about like how do we collect that information and facilitate it for a broader audience.
I'll introduce myself and then my colleague, and then we'll hand it over to you, Annette. I'm Amy Blythe. I'm the Regional Engagement Officer on the West Coast. So I work fully remote for Emory from my home in Sacramento, California. So I've had the pleasure of working with and meeting in person several times. Annette, she's been a great partner so far. I started with Emory just a little over a year ago, last June. I came on board, so I've been on campus several times, and I've been enjoying getting to know the West Coast alumni from Seattle to Portland to San Francisco and LA and Orange County and San Diego. So it's great to meet all of you virtually as well. Let my colleague Jamie introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this Saturday. My name is Jamie Hogan-Yarbrough. I, like Amy, am an Associate Director of Regional Engagement on the team. I actually represent some of the Atlanta network. So I'm here in Atlanta, and I oversee the 40 Plus network, the Creative Network, the Alumni Network, and a couple of others. But very excited to have you guys join us today, and I'll turn it over to Annette.
All right, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. And I just want to make sure that everyone can see my slide.
Yes.
Super. So I'm going to jump right in. Today, we are talking about leadership and influence. And I'll start by telling a little story. So it's 1997. I get into Emory and I embark on a huge adventure, my journey into adulthood. I had big hopes and dreams before leaving Atlanta for Denver, or leaving from Denver to Atlanta, not knowing I'd spend most of my first semester at college crying because the people were so intimidating, the awful humidity, and the fact that I was being completely ignored by my huge crush. And let's be honest, he barely knew my name the entire time we were in college. Then we get to 2016, 20 years later. I've graduated with my MBA. I have a high-paying job in tech, a cool apartment in San Francisco, and lots of friends. The only thing missing in my mind was a romantic relationship. So in an effort to be proactive and efficient, I rejoined the world of dating apps. Shockingly, when I showed up as my authentic self and told my story in the way I wanted other people to hear it, I connected with someone very interesting. You may wonder where I'm going with this. Why is putting yourself on a dating app an act of leadership? Well, it's showing up. It's managing and holding yourself accountable for your actions, and it's shaping your interactions with others. So 4 years later, in 2020, I married that guy I connected with, who just happened to be the crush who hardly noticed me back at Emory. Not only did we build our family with what I called a COVID-3, dog, Peloton, and baby, but I took a leap. I left tech and I built my own coaching practice, focusing on helping individuals and teams build values-driven careers, collaborations, and lives. I could have shown you my degrees, my former companies, and all that I've accomplished, but instead, and of course you can see those things on my LinkedIn profile, I am focusing on how leadership skills allowed me to build the life and the impact that are important to me. And we'll spend the rest of our time together talking about how each leader here can change the course of your life and other people's lives using your own leadership skills. So what is leadership? Does anyone have any thoughts? Feel free to put it in the chat or call out what leadership means to you. All right, everyone's a little bit shy. That's okay. So there is no one way to define leadership, but as a coach, I think about it like this: empowering and protecting the ability of others to succeed while learning, growing, and collaborating along the way. When you show up, manage yourself, and are thoughtful about the way you interact with others, you truly influence their ability to be their best and to succeed, and to help your team and organization succeed as well. So I'm seeing a few things come in on the chat. Let's see, we see the vision and support you need the vision and support your team to accomplish their goals. You're a motivator and inspirational. Yeah, those are all things that I associate with leadership. Thank you so much for sharing. And Karen says, to provide a way to show others how to motivate, integrate their abilities into a group, and show them how to get things done. Absolutely. So as you can see in the image, there are so many qualities and characteristics that make up a leader. And I'm sure everyone here embodies many, if not all of them. It just depends on how we demonstrate them and the way they come up in our day-to-day lives. So I also want to talk about influence. What does influence mean? The culture we live in has conditioned us to think of influence as something that requires a great amount of effort, planning, and performing for an audience. We've been trained to believe that influence only exists if there's immediate and large-scale feedback, such as likes, shares, or some sort of compensation. However, even if you think you're not being heard, you are having impact on the people you connect with. Influence is a ripple effect that you have on the world. In her book, You Have More Influence Than You Think, social psychologist Vanessa Bonds demonstrates that we all have influence through our words, our choices, and even just our presence. I first heard Vanessa on Dr. Maya Shankar's podcast, A Slight Change of Plans, and I highly recommend you check that out because I've learned so much there. But how can we recognize our power to persuade and learn to wield it wisely? I put together 3 high-level tips that will give you the power to use your influence positively throughout your day-to-day life. First, be aware. Studies, also seen in Vanessa's book, show that people are generally so unaware of their influence that they do one of 2 things. 1, they either influence people with behavior that's not actually what they want to reflect because they don't realize how much people notice or emulate them. Or 2, they feel they have to be much more aggressive than they really do in order to influence people's behavior, action, and belief. So your awareness allows you to be exactly who you want to be and how you want to be seen. It also allows you to be that in an authentic and natural way instead of trying to force your influence on people. 2, be mindful. When you're in a leadership role, as all of you are, generally you are above, quote unquote, people on whatever hierarchy that's been built into the system that you're part of. There may be feelings of obligation or even apprehension for the people who report to you when you ask for things to be done, or even when you set examples of behavior by the way you perform or react. You likely don't have the same feelings since your role in perceived success is not necessarily determined by the people who report to you. So when you are mindful of how other people feel and the way they react to you, you are able to present yourself, your actions, and your requests in a way that influences people and their progress positively. Okay. And 3, we want to be intentional. Everyone in the world is bombarded daily with so many voices, so many messages, so many requests. Now that we know that anyone can be influenced at any time by what they hear and see, it's essential that we're mindful of who and what we present. We want to A, make sure that our voice is distinct from everything else being thrown at people. And B, we want people to take away, what we want people to take away reflects our values and our priorities. And we want it to be useful to them and everyone else touched by our ripple of influence. So, since leaving Emory, I've had lots of different jobs. I've volunteered on many different committees and boards. Needless to say, I've had many, many bosses and reported to many different types of leaders. Were they all good leaders? The answer is a resounding no. When I think about the jobs where I was most productive and impactful, there is a single common denominator, the leader to whom I reported. A recent study from BetterWorks showed that 57% of unhappy employees leave their jobs because of their bosses, not because of the work they're doing or not doing. Let's see. As a leader, which everyone on this call is, for the Emory Alumni Association, and likely in other organizations and other facets of your lives, it's up to us to create our leadership story. So think back to the descriptors you thought of when I asked what makes a leader. How do these characteristics and actions show up when you interact with other volunteers, teammates, employees, or even your friends and family? My challenge to you is to consciously plan to notice and raise your awareness, your mindfulness, and your intentionality to influence these people. Does anyone want to share what it would look like to do that in the coming week, the coming month? Anything you might change about the way that you interact, or even the awareness you have around your own personality and the way you show up?
Okay, I'll answer.
All right, thank you.
I think that in terms of personality and how it can be perceived, I want to know all the details. I'm just a details person, and I think that sometimes that comes across as like I'm drilling someone or don't trust them. And so that is something I have worked to be aware of and continue to work to be aware of. Like, hey, I just want to know. I'm not judging you.
That's an amazing example because there is so much value in gathering those details. And I'm sure that the work you do as a result is extremely well thought out and productive. But you're right, sometimes it can make people feel a little bit defensive if they don't understand the reason behind what you're doing, or they don't know that that's a personality trait that's very important to how you operate. So great example, Kirsten. Thank you. Anyone else want to share anything? Okay, well, this is something that you can keep thinking about. And
can I share? Is that all right?
Absolutely, sure.
All right. I'm sorry about the chat because your husband was a friend of mine back in the day, and that's the first time I saw him in like 20 years. So,
no worries.
I apologize for that. So my mind is blown that I picked this one, and you happen to be her as
no,
other. So yeah,
it's my meet cute story.
All right. I would like to be more intentional about, now I think about it, it was to appreciate others, like to really appreciate them, and not to be like just whatever, not to say it just to say it, but to say it and to think it and to feel it and to appreciate it and to delegate better, because I find that I take on too much and I need to figure out ways to delegate in a more appropriate way to allow people to do what they need to do and not me to take over everything. So that's what I would like to change.
Yeah, the awareness around both of those things is huge. And thank you for sharing. And I will definitely tell Mike hi for you. But yeah, in terms of the way that we offer appreciation to people, if it's just words coming out of our mouths, people know that. And when we can be authentic about what we appreciate and how people are making our lives easier, or they're making our team more successful, it does add value, and it encourages them to continue to do more and to grow. So that's a huge awareness. And then delegation, wow, that's something that we probably all can work on a constant basis for the rest of our lives. There are so many things that you can't control when you delegate tasks to other people, but when you don't delegate, you have so many things that you're not able to do because you're stuck doing work that might not be appropriate for your level of knowledge, or just the bandwidth that you have. So I really appreciate you sharing those things. Yeah, and I thank you everyone for engaging. It makes presenting a million times easier. So as we think about our leadership story, what I want to remind you, and what Kirsten and Karen showed so well, is that we're all a work in progress. We're constantly updating and adding to our leadership vocabulary in order to write the best story possible. So what makes your leadership story really good? I encourage you to start with a couple questions. The first is, what are my priorities? Are your and your organization's values and passions being reflected and prioritized in the way that you the way that you act? So you may not have a short list of your values. Maybe they include integrity, honesty, action, productivity, friendliness. It doesn't matter what they are. It's so great to define them, have them available to you, and make sure that as you make decisions and about where you work, who you work with, how you lead, the words that you use, that those values are being reflected. The next thing is, how do I show up? Do you show up as a confident and powerful person? And when I say powerful, I don't mean aggressive or demanding, but I mean someone who feels strong, someone who feels like they have the control that they need to move forward in a way that actually gets the work done, and keeps things going. So I want to be cognizant of the time, so I'm just going to go quickly. These questions help you define your narrative. They are what I would call the summary that shows up on the back of the book. The reason people are drawn to you and want to dive in to read more or to learn more. So to define the details, the challenge, the rising action, the climax of the book, and maybe the resolution, at least to a chapter or one piece of the story you're telling, I think about these questions. What do I need to succeed? What are the tools and the internal leadership qualities that I need to succeed? And what needs to change? Do I need more of something? Do I need to do less of something? Is there something that is sabotaging me and the way that I interact with people that I could get rid of and feel better about? So the answers to these questions might change over time. You might struggle to answer them at different points in your life, depending on where you're at. I know I certainly did, and continue to struggle or to challenge myself to see if the answers are changing. And we've all heard again and again that the most successful people surround themselves with other smart people. What makes you different? As a leader, you're not expected to know everything or do any of this in a silo. How can you surround yourself with the support that you need? In addition to the people who love you, who care for you, and typically are on your side, who agree with the decisions you're making? Who are the objective people who can serve as sounding boards, accountability partners, and objective cheerleaders? So this is my not so subtle pitch for leadership coaching and finding a coach that you connect with. The way I think about it is, if Michael Jordan had a coach until the end of his very, very successful career, why shouldn't you? A coach holds space for you, your team, to identify what's keeping you stuck, identify where you want to be, and the best steps to get there. This is a super short session, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about coaching and the value. But if it sounds interesting to you, for yourself, for your Emory board team, for the companies that you work with, I'd love to talk more about it and introduce you to coaches who might be a good fit, or even work with you myself. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are any questions.
And don't be shy if you have a question or even a comment, or maybe a personal experience, a story to share. Would love to hear from all of you. I know me starting in this role, just in the past year, I've not been afraid to ask questions, admit when I didn't know an answer that an alum would ask me, or would mention a professor and assumed that I knew that professor. So I think, being able to admit when you don't know an answer is also opens you up to, asking questions, and shows that you're willing to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ariel, did you have a question?
I did. My name's Ariel Disick. I graduated the law school in 2015, and I'm on the New York board. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about imposter syndrome and how that plays into our abilities as leaders, because I personally feel like I suffer from imposter syndrome a lot, and I don't want it to self-sabotage the value that I bring to
Absolutely.
places.
So yeah, imposter syndrome is something that's actually getting a lot of attention right now in the way that we define, what it is and how it impacts the work people do and the way they show up. And for the way I think about it, imposter syndrome is one saboteur that comes at us, and we have to figure out why. Why do we feel like an imposter? What is the voice that's telling us that we don't belong, even when we logically know that we do? So what I like to work with when I'm talking to clients who are in leadership roles, who are feeling like they might not belong, or they might not add the value that they are perceived to add, is what makes this role important? What are the strengths that you bring to it? And how can you remind yourself on a regular basis, daily, hourly, weekly, about how those strengths live within you, how you utilize them to be productive, and how other people see them and interact with them in ways that help them be more successful as well. Does that help answer the question?
Yes, that was super helpful.
We're going to talk briefly about motivators, demotivators, and how to tap into what motivates people. A couple of you may have seen this type of thing before. I'm guessing for most of you, this might be new. So what I'm going to start with, I'm going to give you a scenario just to read. It'll take like a minute. And then in the chat window, I'm going to ask you to type up a hypothesis. What do you think might be going on here? Now, it's just a hypothesis. I'm not asking you to jump to conclusions because we don't know, but what might be going on here? So here's a scenario based on real life. This is not fictitious. Change the names, of course, but take a second, read it over. When you have a chance, you're welcome to throw out a hypothesis. What might be going on here? Again, we're not jumping to conclusions. They're just hypotheses. I'll give you a minute, but whenever you're ready, feel free to throw it out there. just like another 30 seconds to a minute, and then we can talk about it. All right, for the sake of time, if you're still thinking, that's totally fine. Let's talk about some of your hypotheses. Thank you so much for typing them. I see a lot of them. One of the themes that I see are personal issues that perhaps there's something going on, has nothing to do with work that might be affecting it. And we all know that there's such an overlap between what happens at work, what happens at home, and the two can definitely affect one another. We've all experienced this in our lives. I mean, it's a big deal for all of us. So that's entirely possible. So I see several of you talking about that. I saw a couple people talking about onboarding or setting expectations in the first place. So maybe the expectations weren't set clearly at all, and what you're reading is due to the fact that that James doesn't fully understand what's expected in the organization. I'm reading some of your other ones. I'm just looking for themes here. There's so many to read. It's taking me a second. Onboard got that. He's spiraling down. He's been given negative feedback, but so far, based on what we've read, there's no evidence of a solution to the negative feedback, which totally causes people to spiral. I'm working with a tech company right now. The CEO is a great.
Actually, I meant his own negative feedback, not.
Oh.
As I said, I went to the Positive Intelligence Emory event, which really talked about this internal. So
yeah. Linda, thank you for clarifying. By the way, anyone else, please jump in. Like I actually welcome it. I enjoy it. So there's actually both of those could be valid. Yeah. So his own self-talk, perhaps, his negative feedback, which we could talk a lot about. The messages that we send to ourselves have a really powerful impact on how we show up at work and at home. It also could be clearly he's getting negative feedback from the organization as well. And it's unclear if there's a solution. This is just, a short scenario. So yeah, Linda, thank you. It's some combination of both, perhaps. What he's telling himself, what he's being told by others is definitely plausible. Not feeling supported. And I also see, which I love, some people offered some solutions, like have a one-on-one conversation, which is great. I love that. And yeah, some other solutions as well. So we don't know entirely what is happening. We'd never want to jump to conclusions. Definitely agree. Have a conversation and see. Clearly, though, something is going on with his motivation. And just so you know, the research is very clear. The highest level of someone's motivation in an organization is the day they show up to that new job. They're almost always excited to be there. And maybe they've left another job. Maybe they haven't, but they're typically, it's at the highest level. They're so excited. They can't wait to start. And unfortunately, sometimes then it goes down when reality hits. It's never going to be perfect, but hopefully it plateaus at a reasonably high level. And that's what we want, so that reality hits in, no place is perfect, but hopefully for the most part, best case scenario is we've onboarded well, we have mentor systems, we have a good boss, good peers, and for the most part, most days are good. Sadly, situations like this happen where the person that showed up the first day for a multitude of reasons isn't the same person 2 or 3 months later. The reasons are multifaceted, but one of them could be something about motivation. Clearly, that's playing a role in this scenario among perhaps other ones. So let's talk about motivation. Some of you may have been exposed to some of this in your time in Emory. I suspect most of you have not, if you weren't like a psych major or some other things. So it's a shame we use the word motivation as if there's one variable, because we really need to think about it differently, perhaps split it in half. So the things that motivate us are distinct from the things that demotivate us. So it's not so much I'm motivated or I'm not. In fact, the things that motivate me or you or most people are distinct from the ones that demotivate them. The opposite of motivation is indifference. I just don't care. What I have found, and you're welcome to tell me, is when I work with people both at Emory and other organizations, the hardest ones to move are the ones that just don't care anymore. If people are angry or frustrated or upset, I'm not saying I enjoy those conversations, but clearly they still care. That's why they're angry, frustrated, or upset. And we can work with that, and we can try to get past that and to resolve the situation. The hardest ones that I've found are just, sorry, I just don't care anymore. And it's really hard to motivate someone who doesn't care anymore. So let's talk about the motivators and demotivators. As we're going through, I know it's obvious, but I want you to think about how this applies to your role working with the Alumni Association. Of course, how do we motivate volunteers? How do we motivate people who want to be involved? Clearly, they have an intrinsic motivation for wanting to do so. If we can tap into that, that's a great thing. However, what can happen is volunteers can become demotivated, and that's something that we want to avoid. So very briefly, there's about 30 years of research on this. We don't have a lot of time. So the top motivators are achievement, the opportunity to achieve something that we feel is valuable. Recognition, we don't need to go on and on, but brief acknowledgement of the important work that people have done. It turns out, and we could talk more about this, that there's unfortunately not enough recognition. Managers aren't great at saying, hey, thank you so much. It's not just thank you, but I was particularly impressed with what you said on slide 6. That was really helpful because we haven't talked enough about that. So it's not just thank you, which helps, but it's a specific recognition showing engagement. I was there, I was listening, and I really appreciate the following thing that you said. Value of the work itself, doing work that people find really interesting. The research on nonprofits is interesting. Oftentimes people volunteer for a nonprofit because they want to cure cancer or make child abuse be as rare, if not, as close to zero as possible. I mean, really important, honorable things. That's wonderful. But sometimes the needs of nonprofits are to handwrite letters, to lick stamps, to raise money. And those are different from the things that motivated them to show up in the first place. So value of the work itself. How can we provide valuable, meaningful work that keep people engaged and want them to keep going? Responsibility, and then advancement. Might be less relevant here, but in your day-to-day jobs, it doesn't mean being promoted tomorrow, but seeing a path for promotion. I can see where I will go for the next 30 years here. So if you can maximize those things, it helps people stay engaged. It helps people with their motivation. The things that demotivate are separate, of course. So the top demotivators are stupid company policies that frustrate us and prevent us from getting our jobs done. So we all need, policies are important, but from time to time, there could have been a policy that was relevant 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago that is not only no longer relevant, but it in fact holds us back from getting the job done. So I imagine some of you can relate. To me, one of the most frustrating things is, doing the best you can, working really hard, and there's some policy that's preventing you, or it takes you more time in order to get the job done. It would have been easier and faster if that policy wasn't in the way. Then there's poor supervision, someone who isn't a good boss or motivator. And then there's a poor relationship with the boss. So then there's, of course, the dreaded combination. There's a bad boss and we don't have another good relationship with that bad boss. Sherry, I totally agree. Not getting enough positive feedback. So each of these has some role as positive and negative. The positive feedback is a motivator. And it is demotivating not to get it. It's actually more powerful as a motivator, which is interesting. But I totally agree with your comment. Poor work conditions. So I often think of teachers right now. There's an exodus of teachers, which is just a shame because the job's hard enough. And then post-COVID, it's gotten even harder. So you can read about this in lots of sources. A lot of them are leaving. And one of the reasons is the work conditions. And it's not just pay. Pay is a big deal, but there are a lot of other things. Speaking of pay, pay is often a demotivator. So, of course, if you're going to give someone a raise who's not happy with a raise, it turns out, oh, good. Thank you, Melissa. It turns out that pay is more powerful as a demotivator. So imagine if you start a new job and you're excited and you find out someone is paid $30,000 more than you, but they're not as well trained. They don't have as much experience. And, you question, are they really as qualified for the job? So it turns out that's more demotivating than it is to pay people. For Emory Healthcare, we're talking a lot about the nursing shortage. And the nursing shortage is what's in the news right now. Of course, it's not just nursing, it's a lot of other things, though nursing might be the most prominent one. So I'm actually working with Emory Healthcare. Money is definitely part of the story, of course, let's be honest, but it's not just money. The media focuses too much on the money part. What we're trying to do is talk through what are the other things we can do. Can we dial down on policies that are frustrating? Can we train supervisors to be better supervisors? Can we provide better work conditions to dial down on the demotivators? And yes, salary, but salary isn't going to fix those things. Salary also doesn't give people feedback. Salary doesn't also give people valuable work. So I'm not saying money doesn't matter. I'm just saying it's part of the equation and it's more powerful as a demotivator than a motivator. All right, I'm going to skip this one for the sake of time. Here's what I want you to think about for yourself, but also for the people that you work with. Imagine if you could create the ideal work environment for yourself. Wouldn't that be great, of course? What specific mix of intrinsic and extrinsic motivators would you have? For example, for me, flexible schedule is my number one. I've never been a 9 to 5 person. That model is called the butts in seats model. You show up at a certain time, you leave at a certain time. Always been a night owl, never wanted to teach morning classes, but I'll gladly do things on weekends, as you can clearly see, in exchange for that. So that's more important for me than money, for example. That's my number one intrinsic. My number one extrinsic is probably micromanagement. Now, no one likes a micromanaging boss, but to me, I absolutely loathe it. Completely demotivating. I'm like, you might as well just do the work yourself. Why are you doing this? I've only had it once or twice in my life, but I found that the impact on me was profound. So if there are things that I don't want in my work environment, number one is micromanagement. That's just me. What I would encourage you to do is think about what is your mix, and then how can you, to the realistic extent, get the most of your intrinsic and the least of your extrinsic as realistically possible. But also think about that when you're working with others. I have conversations with people, basically use this and tell me, and I ask them, tell me what gets you the most excited when you're volunteering and doing work, and what are things that annoy you or you found boring? Like let's try to dial those down to keep you engaged. So that's what I would recommend thinking about. Everyone's a little different. What are the things that seem to motivate them? And what are the things that seem to annoy them? And we want to, maximize to the extent we can the motivators and minimize the demotivators. Some examples, and there can be thousands of these. This is literally, by the way, from an exercise when I've done this before. So these are not mine. These are copying and pasting from other people's comments. They can be lots and lots and lots of things. I love coaching. I love organizing. I love doing lots of things. And so then just figuring out how to get them what they need to keep them engaged. So as you work with people, both at Emory and in your other lives, again, try to figure out what is motivating them. And then career-wise, if we had more time about career coaching, the best you can align your motivators with the type of work that you do, it turns out your performance is likely to be better, your motivation is likely to be enduring, and you're likely to do better in that career. Conversely, if you happen to choose a career that doesn't fit as well, as we've all experienced, sometimes that can be very demotivating. So as you work with others, think about to your comments in chat, what conversations can we have? What can we do? What questions can we ask them to unearth their motivators and demotivators? I'll pause for questions in a second. Motivation is self-fulfilling. So this is not my quote. I love this one. Today is your opportunity to build the tomorrow that you want. a lot of us sometimes feel stuck and frustrated and powerless. And that's the worst feeling. When we think about what is motivating to us and to others, we can build a tomorrow that's better aligned with who we want to be and what we want to do. So with that said, I know that our time is very limited. Let's just open it up. Anyone either verbally or in the chat window want to throw out questions, comments, totally welcome it, of course. Oh, thank you, Sherry. I appreciate that. This is the very speed version of motivation, but I hope it was still clear.
So quick question, this is Vicki Hunter. Thanks so much. How have you seen like managers really kind of quickly get in tune with like what their employees are demotivated by, other than like obviously just asking and having a conversation?
Great question. Yeah. In some cases, people do feel comfortable. If there's psychological safety between you and the people that you work with, they will be honest with you. So there is a percentage of cases, and it depends on the person and the industry, where you can just have a really honest conversation. But let's be honest, some people don't feel comfortable doing that. So unfortunately, in those cases, then we have to find a different method to get that out. So I'm a huge fan of sometimes in those cases, anonymous, very brief surveys. Just use Google Forms, for example, is one way to do it. And promise them, like, log out of your Google accounts. I don't want to know who's saying what. Tell me, what are the 2 things that most frustrate you about working here? And we're not going to focus on any individual's comments. We're just going to look for themes. So let's say there's 30 people working with you. So we'll just look at what are like the main themes that seem to come up. We don't want to hyper focus on any one person's comments. And I just did this the other day, and like I would say 80% of them talked about having too much work and just not enough time and resources to do it. Like, okay, that's a theme. Let's talk about that theme so that no one feels personally called out. And so then you can talk about it culturally for your team rather than focus on an individual who may or may not feel comfortable talking about it. I see another one from Amy, one of my favorite people. How do we navigate company policy as a leader? Company makes policy and you really don't agree, but yes, oh, absolutely. So to me, this is, we could talk a lot. The short version of that is, to me, how do we go one level higher and to understand what the policy is trying to achieve? Because I'm never going to lie. I'm not going to say I love this when I don't. But if the policy is trying to achieve a goal, let's talk about the goal the policy is trying to achieve and emphasize that and be honest about, yes, there is a policy. We have to follow the policy, but here's the goal we're trying to achieve. Okay, I thought someone was jumping in. To hopefully tap into the intrinsic motivation about that goal and minimize the extrinsic demotivation about the stupid policy that we don't agree with. So yeah, I've had to do this myself, and it can be frustrating, but we can try to tap into what motivates people about the goal and minimize what demotivates them about the policy. Any resources, books, podcasts that, oh, there are. Yeah, this topic is so rich. I had to choose like what to cover. There are hundreds of them. There's a book by Daniel Pink called Drive, which is all about motivation. It's great. It's well written. Highly recommend that. There's also on YouTube like a 16-minute video where he summarizes his book. First one that comes to mind, but there's lots of others I can send you. All right, we're rapidly running out of time. I defer to my colleagues. If there is time for another question, comment, happy to have it. If we're running out of time, I totally understand.
Let's take another one. I can never resist while we have you here. And I love that you have a former student in the room.
I have a couple of them, I think.
Michael, what would you say your biggest motivator is?
What is my biggest motivator?
Oh,
wow, I'm on the spot. My biggest, so I've always had, there's something called the Berkman assessment, which is assessed like a personality assessment. My highest score, 99 out of 100, is called social service. It's just helping others. So I've always known I wanted to be in a helping profession. Didn't quite know what, honestly, I fell into my profession by accident. So in grad school, there's lots of things you can focus on, and I focused on organizational behavior, which is the dynamics of people within organizations. Also focused on conflict management and things like that. So my biggest motivator seems to be helping people find not just motivation, but fulfillment in their careers, because there's an overlap between fulfillment in our careers and happiness at home. And sadly, we can all speak to it. We've all probably had times where we've struggled at home, which spills over to work. But when we struggle at work, it spills over to home. So this seems to be my passion, how to help people find better about, feel better about their life situations, work at home, so that it actually blends into each other in a positive way. Oh, that's just me.
Well, thank you, Michael. And I do encourage everyone to make space in their board meetings or as they get to know board members one-on-one to ask these questions. It's so important to make sure that this is a mutually beneficial arrangement as they volunteer with us. And we just have to make space and really get to know it. But thank you so much, Michael, for being here today. It is always a pleasure to hear you speak.
No, that's very kind. Thank you for having me.